Good morning. Our opening words this morning are by Amy McKenzie Quinn. Welcome to this common sacred space. Common because we are all welcome. Sacred because we transform the ordinary and attend to the profound. We carry with us our regrets, doubts, fears, stories, and laughter that they may inspire our worship. Above all, may we each meet what we need most to find on this day in this common space. We're glad you're here. And so I just want to welcome you live from Fellowship Hall. This is our LCUUF, however many U's are in there, LCUUF Sunday service. So our announcements were on a slideshow before the service. If you didn't see them or they were a little difficult to read, don't worry. We'll be sending them out tomorrow in our sharing. Now I want to say a little bit about this Seder service. The Passover Seder is part of the Jewish tradition, and it is celebrated at this time of year by almost all Jews. The Seder, and that word actually means order, much like we use order of service, celebrates the escape of the ancient Israelites from slavery in Egypt into freedom, as is described in the Hebrew Bible in the book of Exodus. Now you might wonder why we here, who are for the most part not Jewish, might celebrate such a ritual. Are we not somehow intruding, misappropriating somebody else's tradition? Are we, in fact, defiling the tradition by holding the Seder in the morning rather than after sunset? Or for that matter, oh, horrors of horrors, on Zoom. And really, what is the point of us spending our time on this old story out of the Bible? I hope the reasons might become clear as I tell you this particular story. This is the story of Arthur Waskow. Arthur Waskow was working as a peace and justice activist in Washington, D.C. in 1968 when Reverend Martin Luther King was shot. In a few days, Washington and another number of other cities were on fire as people protested, and the government responded by calling out the National Guard, the military, and put those cities under curfew. Now, Waskow was a Jew, but not really a practicing one. However, he did celebrate Passover Seder with his family in all its hidebound traditional form. That evening, as he was walking home, he passed detachments of the army on the street corners. He passed a Jeep with a machine gun pointing right down his block. He says, somewhere within me, deeper than my breathing, deeper than my brain, my blood began to chant, "This is Pharaoh's army, and I am walking home to do a Seder. This is Pharaoh's army, and I am walking home to do a Seder." In that moment, he realized that the Seder itself had to be liberated from the slavery of the past. He remembered that in the Seder there is a passage that says, in every generation, every human being is obligated to say, we ourselves, not our forebears only, go forth from slavery to freedom. In every generation, not just the ancient ones, not just the ancient Jews, but us now. Every human being, not just Jews, but everyone. The Seder asks, how shall we, everyone, now go forth from slavery into freedom? So over the next year, Waskow wrote his own Seder Haggadah, or script, modernizing those ancient stories with modern texts from Thoreau, yes, a Unitarian, from King and Gandhi, and focusing on the liberation of Black America in particular from the bondage of racism. A rabbi friend told him that what he had written was a midrash, a retelling of the ancient text in a modern way. He published his Haggadah as the Freedom Seder in Ramparts magazine. Some of you may remember that. And in 1969, he held the first Freedom Seder at a Black church in Washington, D.C. with some 800 people, Christians and Jews, Blacks and whites, attending. Waskow, now Rabbi Waskow, has continued to update this Freedom Seder in the years since to keep it relevant. He takes pleasure in seeing others write Passover Haggadahs around feminist, ecological, and other social justice themes. And so we too continue the tradition to riff on the ancient stories as midrash, as modern stories, to bring them into the current generation, to take up Waskow's invitation to expand the Seder into a multi-faith experience, to use the experience of the Seder to renew our commitment to tikkun olam, a Hebrew expression which means to repair the world. To repair the world. Let us begin.
Blessed are you, Spirit of the universe, who gives us light that we may become a light for peace and freedom and healing for all peoples and our planet. Blessed are you, Spirit of life, who has breathed life into us, lifted us up, and carried us to reach this moment. Please light your chalice and then join us, if you like, in singing.
We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share.
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community that cares for one another. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or a sorrow to share today, you can type it into chat now, and we'll read those aloud.
First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding, that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You're welcome to type sorrows and concerns into the chat box.
We have a concern from Judd Dolphin, who says, for children yearning for safety at the border, may they find asylum and space among us. That's all.
And now let us recall the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others. You're welcome to type joys in the chat box.
We have a joy from Liz Mulder, who says she has an extreme joy. I am very proud of my adopted granddaughter, Belen Ramirez, who is now in vet school in Guadalajara. Only 5 years to go. She is doing well and impressing her professors. A long-time dream come true. Michael has one. He needs a mic.
Thank you. Yes, I have a joy. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been helping the musical organization here, CREM, which is really stands for Centro Regional de Estudiantes Musical. They have fallen on hard times, of course, because of the pandemic, and they've not been able to raise the money through live concert performances for the tuition and the scholarships that they give to children in this area. So I decided to help them create a GoFundMe campaign. We launched it on Friday. Within 48 hours, we've raised 33,200 pesos, and I know many of you out there on this Zoom service have contributed, and we thank you enormously for the contributions that you have made to keep musical education going in this area. Thank you.
And this candle from our care team represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that remain present with us every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, frustration, all those things that weigh heavy on our hearts. We will light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows.
The following words are from a Jewish prayer book. In every generation, Pharaoh. In every generation, freedom. When I look in the mirror, which will I see? Let us turn inward for a moment to reflect on this. And now, returning to this time and this space to be together with each other again.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel tells us, prayer is meaningless unless it is submersive, unless it seeks to overthrow and ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehoods. The liturgical movement must become a revolutionary movement, seeking to overthrow the forces that continue to destroy the promise, the hope, the vision.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said this: if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as society must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from thing-oriented society to person-oriented society. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism.
Greta Thunberg tells us, adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope, but I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house is on fire, because it is.
Marge Piercy tells us, live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time, not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes.
Sister Joan Chittister tells us, we may well be the ones Proverbs warns when it reminds us, kings take pleasure in honest lips. They value the ones who speak the truth. The point is clear. If the people speak and the king doesn't listen, there is something wrong with the king. If the king acts propitiously and the people say nothing, something is wrong with the people.
How sweet it is to be with our brothers and sisters together in community. Let us begin by reading responsively, as well as responsibly, from the words which will appear on the screen. This text is by Rabbi Arthur Waskow, slightly adapted. I'll read the black type, and you read the red type. We are the generation that stands between the fires. Behind us is the flame and smoke that rose from Auschwitz and from Hiroshima, from the burning of the Twin Towers in jet fuel lit by rage, from the torching of our Amazon forests for the sake of fast hamburger.
Before us is the nightmare of a flood of fire, the scorching of our planet from a flood of greenhouse gases, or the blazing of our cities in thermonuclear fire, or the glare of gunfire exploding in our children.
It is our task to make from fire not an all-consuming blaze, but the light in which we see each other, each of us different, all of us universally made in the image of God.
We light this fire to see more clearly that the earth, the human race, are not for burning. We light this fire to see more clearly the rainbow in our many-colored faces. Let us take this time to wash our hands. Remember how washing our hands took on a different meaning this last year, becoming very much a life-saving act. As we wash our hands, let us reflect on the hand washing of the myriad of frontline workers, nurses, doctors, bus drivers, delivery people, countless others who put their lives at risk, keeping the world going in time of COVID. Let us ponder the loss of so many of these people to the disease. If you're with another person, wash that person's hands as we do here. If you're alone, wash and dry your hands, contemplating these realities.
Let us ponder how those most vocally denied COVID, who refused to protect others with masks, distance, and hand washing, were often the ones most privileged the ones who could choose not to be on the front line.
After washing our hands, let me offer these words of blessing. Blessed is the Spirit of the universe who creates the fruit of the earth.
A reading from Song of Songs, translated by Marcia Falk. Come with me, my love, come away, for the wet, long months are past. The rains have fed the earth and left it bright with blossoms. Bird wings in the low sky, dove and songbird sinking in the open air above. Earth nourishing tree and vine, green fig and tender grape, green and tender fragrance. Come with me, my love, come away.
Why do we break this bread in two? Because if we hold on to the whole loaf for ourselves, it remains the bread of oppression. If we break it in order to share it, it becomes the bread of freedom. In the world today, there are still some who are so pressed down that they do not have even this bread of oppression to eat. There are so many who are hungry that they cannot come and eat with us today. Therefore, we say to them, we set aside this bread as a reminder to you that we owe you justice and a share of the earth's fruitfulness, and that we will work to make this sharing real. In the same way, if human beings try to gobble up all the abundance of the world and leave nothing for the other forms of life to eat and breathe and drink, the abundance withers away into the death of many life forms and despair for ourselves. If we renew the earth's abundance for other life forms besides ourselves, the earth will flourish and all beings will have enough to eat. We are called to share our bread with the hungry. This year, we share in a world of greed and violence, but we pledge to work in this coming year so we can share and celebrate in a world at peace. And now we will drink 4 times from our cups to honor the 4 stages in the path of liberation. These represent 1, becoming aware of oppression, 2, opposing oppression, 3, imagining alternatives, and 4, accepting personal and communal responsibility to act. So we sip first from the cup of awareness. We learn to recognize the reality of oppression. And so I take a sip and invite all of you, including you at home, to do so as well. Every question is an act of freedom. So let us ask new questions, our own questions, even if we don't yet know the answers. Question: why is there bitterness? The bitterness of turning workers into slaves.
Look, one Nicaraguan free trade zone worker says, some people might say, what are you all complaining about? Wouldn't you rather work in a factory, even if the conditions are bad and you don't get paid much, than have no job at all? No. At least for me, as a woman, I work. I support my family, and I like working. But that doesn't mean that gives other people the right to come, and we always have to say yes, yes, yes for everything. And we'll have to be beaten and hit, just like a dog when it gets hit and it moves its tail and comes back. No, we are not going to do that. That's like slaves. That's pastime. We came to the point where we said, it's enough, and that's why we formed the union.
Question: why are we tense or relaxed? Why do extremes of poverty and wealth exist?
A mother's place in the American workforce has always been tenuous at best. The United States remains the only industrial country that doesn't mandate paid parental leave. And the federal government doesn't fund universal pre-kindergarten. Often feel pressure to return to work, or worry that they will seem dispensable. One lawyer for these employees says mothers have become an easy target for companies looking to lay off employees during the pandemic.
Question: why do we experience the salt tears of estrangement or the sweetness of inclusion?
An immigration attorney writes, I have been working with a Colombian asylum detainee. The day she finally got out of the INS jail, where she had been for 9 months, she looked back at the windows of the jail to wave goodbye to the women she was leaving behind. She knew, and they knew, that the windows were too high for the inmates to see out, but they knew she would be able to see the windows from the street. So the women inside stood up on chairs and pressed their palms to the windows. We stood there in this miserable warehouse district of Queens, looking at all those hands held high.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. The Lord told Moses what to do, let my people go. To lead the tribe of Israel through, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. For you the cloud shall clear the way, let my people go. A fire by night, a shade by day, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. We need not always weep and moan, let my people go. And where these slavery chains for long, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
And what are the plagues that result from the Pharaoh's oppression today? They ruin the land and shatter its people. But they are not punishments upon the land or the people. They are consequences of the Pharaoh's oppressive rule. They teach us when rulers ignore human needs and destroy human lives, the earth itself writhes and rebels in agony. The damage falls not on the powerful alone, but on us all. And so we pour from our glasses the juice of celebration to affirm our grief at the sufferings of Mother Egypt. As we recall the plagues of the ancient story, we call out also the plagues today. As one of us calls out the ancient plague, another will name a modern counterpart.
Blood,
War,
frogs,
COVID-19,
vermin,
destruction of the environment,
beasts,
injustice and corrupt government,
cattle disease,
violence and crime,
boils,
neglect of human needs,
hail,
oppression of nations and people,
locusts,
corruption of culture,
darkness,
subjugations of science, learning, and free speech,
slaying of the firstborn,
erosion of freedoms.
In every generation, a Pharaoh rises up to enslave us. In every generation, every human being must seek to free the community anew. In many peoples, perhaps foremost among them, the Black community, this ancient story has stirred new births of freedom, new songs of hope. And now we drink from the cup for the second time. We drink from the cup of resistance to oppression. I invite you to take a sip, all of you.
Martin Luther King tells us, "I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government."
King continues, "A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say, this is not just."
King goes on, "A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from war and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death."
We'll now drink from the third cup, the cup of envisioning the new world. In tradition, this is Marion's cup, reminding us of Miriam and her role in the liberation of the Israelites from the Egyptians, and whose well helped the Israelites survive in the dry desert. The cup is a symbol of the liberation of women and women's role in social justice. It could be a cup of water because of water's waters birth new possibility and take on the tastes that we create anew. And now I invite you once again to take a sip.
Audre Lorde writes, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid."
We will now eat the Seder meal. Please know that you are free to choose to partake or not from any or all of these items. I'm speaking to those of you at home that took advantage of our offer of the food or put together your own plates. Let us start with the matzah. Why do we eat this flat, unleavened matzah? Because the decision to act came upon our forebears so quickly that their dough had not yet risen when you, the breath of life, bore them to freedom through a hurricane of transformation. And so I invite all of you now to eat of the matzah.
Strange is our situation here on earth. Each of us comes from a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that we're here for the sake of others, for the countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected by a bond of sympathy. Many times a day, I realize how much my outer and inner life is built upon the labors of people, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received.
These bitter herbs, parsley, what is the reason for them? Because oppressors everywhere make the lives of our brothers and sisters miserable. Put this so you can dip. Not in the wine, in the salt water. So I invite you to dip your bitter herbs into the salt water and then eat. Yes, it's a little messy.
Rabbi Michael Werner tells us, the best hope to create a better world is to replace the old bottom line of money and power with a new bottom line of love and generosity. People of all faiths need to shape a political and social movement that reaffirms the most generous, peace-oriented, social just committed, and loving truth of the spiritual heritage of the human race. It's only this resurrection of hope that can save us from a new wave of global hatred.
And why this charoset, which is a sweet mixture of chopped apples, dates, raisins, nuts, and honey? Because sometimes we make our slavery, our own slavery itself, into a sweetness out of habit. And so I invite you all to, however you get it done, to get some charoset on some matzah and consume it. I'll give you this piece.
Maya Angelou offers these words: "We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from the light, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity in the flush light. We dare to be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free."
Why this egg? Because the springtime is a time of rebirth, and when we can bring new possibility, new freedom into our lives. And so I invite you all to eat a piece of egg. And this is going to be fun. Let me see. Okay. You can, and I'll take the yolk.
Excuse me, I'm still eating. Parker Palmer writes, "I will wax romantic about spring and its splendors in a moment, but first there is a hard truth to be told. Before spring becomes beautiful, it is plug ugly. Nothing but mud and muck. I've walked in the early spring through fields that will suck your boots off, a world so wet and woeful it makes you yearn for the return of ice. But in that muddy mess, the conditions for rebirth are being created. Though spring begins slowly and tentatively, it grows with a tenacity that never fails to touch me. The smallest and most tender shoots insist on having their way, coming up through the ground that looked only a few weeks earlier as if it would never grow anything again. The crocuses and snowdrops do not bloom for long, but their mere appearance, however brief, is always a harbinger of hope. And from these small beginnings, hope begins at a geometrical rate. The days get longer, the winds get warmer, and the world grows green again."
Why this olive? Because for millennia, the olive branch has represented the symbol of peace, and we seek to make peace where there has currently been war. And why this orange? Why this orange? Because in olden days, there was no orange on the Seder plate, and it was said that outsiders, gay men and lesbian, transgendered people, those who lack some important ability or skill, the unlearned, all these no more belonged in the community than an orange belongs on the Seder plate. So we place an orange on the Seder plate to say firmly, all these belong in our communities. And now you might enjoy the orange. Thank you.
Wesley Feinberg writes, "Like racism and all forms of prejudice, bigotry against transgender people is a deadly carcinogen. We are pitted against each other in order to keep us from seeing each other as allies. Genuine bonds of solidarity can be forged between people who respect each other's differences and are willing to fight their enemy together. We are the class that does the work of the world and can revolutionize it. We can win true liberation." This is the time in our service when we ask you to remember that we share our gifts through pledging and donations. Even in these times, our connections to each other and our contributions to the community continue. Instructions for payments to the fellowship were on the slide during the announcements and will be in the email tomorrow. While you consider your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization providing food aid in our Lakeside community. When you pay your pledge, please add something to Share the Basket. Please donate Share the Basket separately from your pledge payment or indicate what part of your donation is for Share the Basket. Your offerings are gratefully received.
And now let us drink from the fourth cup, the cup of responsibility and action. And so I invite you to take a sip from your cup.
Rabbi Abraham Heschel tells us, "We have failed to fight for right, for justice, for goodness. As a result, we must fight against wrong, against injustice, against evil. We have failed to offer sacrifices on the altar of peace. Now we must offer sacrifices on the altar of war. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible."
All are responsible, yet we are not all alike. At our tables, year by year, we meet 4 people seeking. One who seeks wisdom in the teachings of the past. One who rebels, seeking new knowledge from a time of transformation. One who seeks truth through simplicity of heart. One who does not relate by asking, but comes open, waiting to be filled with experience.
Let us extinguish our chalices with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment, those we keep in our hearts and share with all the world.
Our closing words are drawn from the poem Exodus and After by Cynthia Greenberg. Leaving is the onlyest part, determinedly setting out through unmapped waters, grasping ourselves, the air, what comes next, fully in our hands. We are wild, joyful, joyfully moving as the dream of our mothers, fathers, cousins dreamed for us. Even in our haste, history whispers, bring all you have borne with you. Leaving it, you will find no peace. What do you make of liberation? That's the trick. Can you, unshackled, set someone else free?
please stay around if you'd like for discussion. We will start with some small groups of about 8, and you can turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves. If you want to leave your group, you can click here. You can click leave, and you'll come back to the main room. You can have a discussion there or ask to go to another room. Here are some possible questions to discuss. I'm waiting for the bells. Okay? Okay, so question number 1, are there any traditions or ceremonies, religious or not, you and your family have maintained over the years? And the second question is, do you think this ancient ceremony, the Passover Seder, is appropriate for our modern days? Why or why not? Thank you. Okay, see you in groups.